Can you imagine that in 10 years when we are sitting here, we have an implant in our brains, and I can immediately feel, because you all will have implants, and we measure your brain waves, and I can immediately tell you how the people react, or I can feel how the people react to your answers.
In the book, which is available to you, on the fourth Industrial Revolution, it changes not only what we are doing, it changes us. It's a fusion of our physical, digital, and biological spheres. It's an integration of those spheres. Just think of sensors planted into our brains. The opportunities are immense.
Conferencing, to just name a few. Later, the team at Xerox PARC made computing personal and practical with Alto. That ushered in the personal computing era. Then, of course, came the web, the browser, and then the iPhone. Each of these seminal moments has brought us one step closer to a more symbiotic relationship between humans and computing. Talk about something that's very fundamental to the human experience, the way we work, and more specifically, the way we work with computers. In fact, we've been on this continuous journey towards human-computer symbiosis for several decades.
Let's go to another one, right? Again, this is another example of translation. So here, they took human beings, they stuck them into an fMRI machine, and they showed them images. And they taught the AI, I want you to translate from the readings of the fMRI, so how blood is moving around in your brain, to the image. Can we reconstruct the image then? The AI then only looks at the brain, does not get to see the original image, and it's asked to reconstruct what it sees, right? So when you dream, your visual cortex sort of runs in reverse. So this means certainly in the next couple of years, we'll be able to start decoding dreams. Okay, so it can reconstruct what you're seeing, but can it reconstruct what you're thinking, your inner monologue? So here they did roughly this, it's a different lab, but roughly the same idea. They had people watch these videos and would try to reconstruct their inner monologue. So here's the video. It's this woman getting hit in the back, getting knocked forward, okay? And then what did the AI reconstruct? I see a girl that looks just like me, get hit on the back, and then she's knocked off.
So just to really name something really quickly, the point about differentiating between Siri or I do voice transcription and then it kind of fails, and AI seems to it's not really always growing or working, and we shouldn't be really that scared about AI because it always has these problems, right? And we've always been promised, oh, AI is going to take off, it's going to do all these things. What the point of this is, I hope you're seeing that when you're just translating between different languages and everyone's now working on one system, that the scaling factor and the growth is changing in a very different way.
Mark here can control a smart home and an Apple Vision Pro with only his thoughts, thanks to a brain implant from a company called Synchron. Synchron's brain-computer interface, BCI, is designed to allow people living with paralysis to control digital devices using their thoughts.
I can talk to you with my thoughts.
The company recently announced 2 new milestones: the first use of its BCI with Amazon Alexa, and the first use of its BCI with the Apple Vision Pro. Mark, one of Synchron's trial participants, was able to use Amazon's Fire tablet to turn lights on and off, see who is outside using a Blink security camera, start video streaming, and more using only his brain and Synchron's BCI.
Alexa traditionally has been thought of as a voice-based system, and so this would open up the availability of Alexa control for people who don't have voice control.
Apple Vision Pro, on the other hand, is typically controlled by eye tracking or eye gaze combined with hand gestures. Synchron's BCI presents an alternative to hand gestures for people without the use of their hands, and that combining eye gaze or eye tracking with a BCI might have some advantages.
Otherwise, you're using up a lot of the compute power of the BCI to solve the trajectory problem. That's solved really nicely with eye gaze, but the problem is you don't have the ability to make different types of selections, maybe left click, right click, scroll, copy, drag down, menu, back. So if you can send those discrete key press functions on top of the eye gaze, then you've got really beautiful synergistic natural control.
Synchron Stentrode BCI is implanted with a catheter into a blood vessel near the brain's motor cortex. Once in place, users can generate actions on their digital devices using the BCI by thinking about moving their body.
The intent to move your hand versus your finger versus your foot looks different. One of our features is like a dial or a scroll. And that's more about the intensity with which you're trying to move. So the ways in which you control the strength, dexterity, and speed of your body is translating into a digital domain. What we're going to see from now for the next couple of decades is the continuing emergence of different types of control features that come out of the brain. So I think a whole software layer is going to emerge around control features that open up new ways of engaging with systems.
These commands sent from the brain are called digital motor outputs. And Oxley says that as this technology progresses, new digital motor outputs will make these BCI devices more useful, capable, and empowering for users.
The sky's the limit with how good it's going to get, and the more access to more brain, the more the features are going to get, and that's how BCI is gonna keep growing.
This is the Out in Front Podcast. I'm your host. Call me whatever. I'm just a man. In this video, right now, this is about 3 years ago in Surrey, England, you were seeing a robot that was controlled solely by the neurons of a rat that they had in a dish. If you recall, last video, about 1999, between that time and 2014, someone used the neurons of a rat to create a brain network array in which they were controlling a simulated flight simulator. This right here is Bluetooth and it's wireless, and it's just crazy, absolutely crazy. We've come a long way in technology from then and now. This is not a remote control car. This is a Bluetooth transmission happening in real time between a robotic car and some neurons in a dish from a rat. And this really happened in England. Technology is heading to a really, really interesting place.
We have to change course, ladies and gentlemen. We have to move from globalization to a new type of globalization, what we call globalization 4.0, globalization in line with the new modern world, with the fourth industrial revolution. We should prepare ourselves for the fourth industrial revolution in a way where we look at this revolution as an opportunity. Mankind, humankind, has now the capability to elevate itself on a higher level. Artificial intelligence is not just a threat for humankind. Artificial intelligence could allow us to humanize robotization and not the contrary.
The difference of this fourth industrial revolution is it doesn't change what you are doing. It changes you. If you take genetic editing, right. Just as an example, it's you who are changed. Yeah. And of course this has a big impact on your identity.
Yeah. And offers certain kinds of possibilities that have to be careful about. When you began to do that kind of gene editing, some people worry that you are changing what it means to be human.
That's the problem. And of course, the new industrial revolution offers us many opportunities.
Neurons on the cortical side started extending axons, find spinal motor neurons in the spinal side, connect with them, and then those farther project and connect to muscle. When we put a light stimulus on the cortical side, we notice the muscle on the opposite side contract. We have modeled for the first time a human cortical motor pathway.
Scientists at Stanford put human brain tissue into a rat. They wanted to see if the human neurons would merge with the rat's brain, enough to control its behavior and respond when they tickled its whiskers. Human cerebral organoids, or mini-brains, are grown in a lab, usually from reprogrammed skin cells, to study brain disorders. If you grow neurons in vitro, like a petri dish, they'll self-organize into biological neural networks with electrical communication similar to a developing brain, and maybe even some basic ability to learn. But mini-brains are hard to grow in a lab. They only get up to a few millimeters wide because they don't get the blood supply or chemical signals they get in a real brain. If you want to study complex brain processes and how they go wrong and how they affect behavior, you can't model those with an in vitro organoid. You gotta grow them in vivo, attached to a living organism. To make these mini-brains more like human brains, they transplanted them into baby rats. As the rat's brain developed, its blood vessels infused the human brain tissue. They also found glial cells in the organoid, which help neurons survive and communicate in ways we don't fully understand. In this environment, with support from the rat brain, the transplanted organoid grew 9 times its size in 3 months. Its individual neurons got bigger than the in vitro neurons, and they were more electrically active, probably in part because they had more dendrites to pick up signals from other neurons. Transplanting the organoids led to changes in their gene expression. All your cells have basically the same genes, but they use them differently. They can turn on a gene when they need the protein it codes for. If a neuron is making a new synapse, a new connection with another neuron, it might express these genes. The transplanted organoids showed more expression of a lot of genes related to neural development. Even though they were grown in a rat's brain, they expressed more of a gene that's only expressed in primate brains called OSTN. Another thing you can do with in vivo models is look at how different brain areas talk to each other to make things like perception and behavior possible. So how much did these human cells merge with the rat's brain? When the rat pup was 3 to 7 days old, they put the mini-brain on its somatosensory cortex, S1. S1 processes sensory input from the rat's body, or soma. If you tickle a rat's whiskers, S1 lights up. Researchers wanted to know, would the organoid respond to the rat's sensations? A week or two after the transplant, they electrically stimulated the rat's S1, and they saw an electrical response in the organoid. But it was even more integrated than that. S1 gets information about the whiskers from the thalamus, a subcortical area deep in the brain. They found cells from all the way in the thalamus had made their way inside the organoid. When they stimulated those thalamic cells, the organoid responded too. The whiskers are a major sense organ for rats. A lot of S1 is dedicated to the whiskers. If you tickle this whisker, you'll get a response there on S1. So if you want to activate an organoid on top of S1, the scientific approach is whisker tickles. Here's the resting activity of some human neurons in the mini-brain when the whiskers are not being tickled. When the researchers touch the whiskers, this happens. So we can see that the human mini-brain is getting sensory input from the rat's body. That brings us to the final and critical test. Does it work the other way around? Can the organoid control the rat? We saw that the rat neurons made it inside the organoid. How far inside the rat brain did the human neurons travel? One way to find out is to infect the organoid with a modified rabies virus. Then you transplant it into the rat, let it grow for a couple weeks, and look for the rabies markers in the rat's brain. They found human cells marked with rabies in the rat's S1 and in the thalamus, so the human cells were deeply integrated into the rat's brain. When they used a different virus called a lentivirus, they found human neural projections all over the rat's brain, motor cortex, auditory, prefrontal, hippocampus. They used that same lentivirus to genetically modify the organoid so it would grow photoreceptors that respond to blue light, a technique called optogenetics. When they shined a blue light on the organoid, they found an electrical response not only in the organoid, but also in the rat cortex, which means the organoid is plugged into the rat, sending signals to its brain in addition to getting sensory signals from it. But the researchers wanted to send more than an electrical signal. They wanted to use the mini-brain to trigger a whole behavior, drinking water, which you definitely can't do in vitro. Here's how they trained the rats. They shined a light on their organoid, alternating between blue and red for 5 seconds each. The blue light activated the organoid. If they licked when the blue light was on, they got water as a reward. If they licked when the red light was on, they got nothing. After a couple weeks, the rats were licking significantly more when their organoid was activated by the blue light. So the researchers activated rat neurons to drive reward-seeking behaviors, which you can think of as rat mind control, but really it's a lot like Pavlov's dog, just with a bell made of genetically modified human brain tissue plugged into its brain. That's all. If this organoid transplant can affect the rat's behavior, how else could it affect them? The researchers looked for effects on memory, motor activity, and fear learning. The transplanted rats did fine on a memory test. In the open field test, you let the animals run around, not in an open field, but in a little box, and you see how much they run around and explore. Transplanted rats look normal. To test their fear learning, they trained the rats to be afraid of a room that smelled like mint, but the transplanted rats didn't look any more or less scared than the normal rats. A previous study found that a human organoid transplanted deeper into a mouse's brain did increase the fear response, leading to more freezing when they heard a tone that signaled a shock.
The second difference of the fourth industrial revolution is that it is not just one technology. People say sometimes, yes, it's a digital revolution. No, it's not just a digital revolution. It is many other areas. It's brain research, nanotechnology, and I could go on and on. The life sciences and so on. It's a fusion of the physical, the digital, and the biological world. That's really the essence of the fourth industrial revolution.
This is a brain in a dish, kind of. It sucks at Pong, but it learned how to play. In some ways, it learns better than AI. Its creators say it's sentient. What does that mean? And why are they teaching brain cells to play video games? For some little brains, life begins at circumcision. Baby foreskin cells are frozen in liquid nitrogen and sold on the internet to a lab that infects them with a virus that turns them into stem cells. Feed them the right brain food and they can grow into mature cortical neurons in a couple weeks, talking to each other with electrochemical signals. Does it look sentient yet? Dishbrain doesn't blindly follow orders. It controls its own behavior, sort of like you do. The idea they were testing in the study is that brains are self-organizing sense-making machines. If neurons are getting sensory input from their environment, they'll spontaneously try to figure out what's causing it, and if they have a way to act on their environment, they'll try to get some control over it, like a baby learning how to use a fork. You get sensory input in the form of light waves and sound waves, and you transduce them into electrical impulses to build mental maps of the world around you. Then you send motor signals, also in the form of electrical impulses, to move around that world. Dishbrain gets information about the Pong world directly in the form of electrical stimulation from 8 electrodes in this sensory part of the brain plate. It can move the paddle by activating these neurons, whose activity is picked up by electrodes in these motor areas. One side moves it up, one side moves it down. But nobody teaches it the rules of Pong. So how does it learn? Discipline. So random stimulation was used as a punishment to reduce the undesirable behavior of missing the ball. And when they hit the ball, they got predictable stimulation as a reward. And it worked. They got better at returning the ball over a 20-minute training session. They got aced less often and had significantly longer rallies. They still weren't great. You could easily beat them. But they learned in 10 or 15 rallies what it took a digital AI 5,000 rallies to learn. Sure, a computer could simulate those 5,000 rallies way faster, but biological systems are natural problem solvers, and research like this might help us understand how they learn so efficiently. Another team taught brains how to drive little cars, and researchers at UC San Diego are going to put human and Neanderthal neurons into crab-walking robots and race them. Cortical Labs is working on connecting their brains to the internet so people can program their own tasks for it. They want to combine the dish brains with artificial intelligence and make cyborgs that live in the cloud.
You have these layers and you lay them so you can actually keep stacking them. So you could grow a brain the size of a room. This thing could be in your garage and you could have your neurons in them.
Ce qu'on pourra s'implanter, ce sera quand ça?
Certainement dans les 10 années à venir. Et d'abord, on va les implanter dans nos vêtements, c'est-à-dire wearables, comme on le dit. Et après, on pourrait s'imaginer qu'on les implante dans nos cerveaux ou dans nos topos.
Et à la fin, peut-être il y a une communication directe entre notre cerveau et le monde digital. Ce que nous voyons, c'est une sorte de fusion du monde physique, digital et biologique.
This is footage from a Swiss institute in which they took the neural activity of a mouse and showed it a film, and they were able to tap the vision of the mouse and recreate digitally the movie that they shown the mouse. Now, in the previous video I showed you from 1999, they did it with the cat.
So our new work is describing a new machine learning algorithm called Zebra. And what Zebra is very good at is being able to uncover sort of the hidden structure in your data. I, as a neuroscientist, am really interested in understanding these complex structures like the brain. It's one of the most complex structures we have in the world. And so for that, we want to disentangle and understand what is actually giving rise to behavior.
So instead of tapping the vision of the mouse like they did in 99, this AI that they use, this algorithm, looked directly at the brain data and took the brain data and reconstructed visual images from movies. This is an advancement.
We took data that was recorded from the brains of mice. It was recorded at the Allen Institute in Seattle, Washington. And what they had done, the experimentalists, is show mice a very classic film. And in this film, you can see a person sort of running down a hallway, getting to a car, and the mouse is just passively watching this, much like you or I might be in a movie theater. And then what we wanted to do is at the same time, they're recording from this mouse's brain. And so we asked the question, could we actually reconstruct what the animal was watching just purely from the neural data? So we used our new algorithm, Zebra, to build this latent representation of the embedding space. And then you can take this embedding space and essentially use that as the basis for a neural decoding algorithm, much like you do in brain-machine interfaces, and then predict exactly the sequence of frames the mouse was watching, even though we didn't know. The algorithm didn't know, of course, what the mouse was watching in that.
What they're able to do when decoding the brainwaves is not just something that is happening with animals. This is something that they're doing with human beings as well. There are plenty of examples of that now.
So this is the first, as far as I know, with this level of accuracy, certainly. So there's been attempts, and very good attempts, at being able to reconstruct what a human or an animal is seeing. But with this algorithm, we could do this with over 95% accuracy on these held out movies. So we think this is sort of a first demonstration that it's actually possible to do this brain-machine interface style decoding. It doesn't mean we can read, of course, the mice's mind or human minds, but it definitely means that the representation space is rich enough to understand even this level of resolution, which is quite exciting.
These advances are not just advances in one area and attracted to one area of growth. These advances are all part of a larger system that entails humanity 2.0, in which the aim is to upgrade each of us by a specified timeline. You'll see more about this later.
If you look at governance and governments, and if you look at innovation as an ecosystem, governments have an essential role to play. Innovation comes mainly and creativity from the private industry. But governors have to be the catalysts inside this ecosystem. Let me just give you some big directions of technological change. We will see the second wave of the internet revolution. And here, of course, we have machine-to-machine interaction, we have wearable computing, we have three-dimensional printing, we have big data. And all those together will create a completely new tsunami force of the internet, which will change every single industry. The second big dimension of technological change, which relates to robots, to drones, combined with artificial intelligence. And finally, maybe the biggest impact on us, particularly as far as we ourselves are concerned. I mentioned the new technological wave is changing who we are. It's the research which is going on in biology, in genetics, with brain research, with regeneration of body parts, with many other elements like enzymes and so on. When we meet for the 20th Governance Summit, you will use an app like Uber, but not anymore to call some driver, but an automatically guided car, a self-driven car, will come to your hotel or wherever you are and will bring you to the airport. Actually, I had a discussion some months ago with the mayor of Los Angeles, and you know Los Angeles is one of the cities with the heaviest traffic, who told me in 2030 Los Angeles will be private car-driven free. And this will allow to transform highways into parks and other public spheres. Or another bet which I would make with you, when we come probably not at the 20th, but already at the 10th or 15th meeting, we will pay, not necessarily with bitcoins, but with other, what they call cryptocurrencies. So the impact of virtual currencies and so on the banking system, we only start now to understand. So what does it mean for governments? It means the 3 E's. Let me start with education and training. Since this technological wave is coming so fast, the government has the obligation to prepare its people for the changes. Because with this meeting, with the exhibition, with the examples, you prepare the people for the great technological innovation which will unfold in the next years. It's also important to develop skills. And here, of course, virtual education plays a very big role, and I'm happy to see that it figures very prominently in the program. So that's the first E, education. We have to change our whole educational systems. The UAE could be one of the first countries which adopts really, in a very structured way, lifelong learning systems. We need new innovative ideas, and we have to integrate everybody into this process. It has to be an open process. That's the reason why I'm so keen to provide also a forward-looking dimension to this Great Reset initiative by integrating the 10,000 global shapers, leaders between 20 and 30 years old, who not only leaders, I mean, they represent society in 400 different cities of the world. So,
when I mention now names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. Mm-hmm. But what we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday...
We'll end here. Did you hear him say they penetrate the cabinets? Look at all the world leaders he had in position. This guy started a program, Young Global Leaders, Young Global Shapers, and they're in every major city throughout the world, following his policy. In his early days, he was the son of a man named Eugene Schwab, who had a company called Escher Wyss AG that moved from Switzerland into Germany, making products directly for Hitler during the Third Reich. In his early career, he took over the board and ran the company, moved it back to Switzerland, and you see that he worked for the United Nations on development planning and sustainability. So when you hear terms like climate change and the 2030 agenda, he started the World Economic Forum with all of these nations following his agenda. And let's just finish here to show you how deep he is in Canada's cabinet.
Yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are
for our actually young global leaders of the world economic forum.